I saw her from my kitchen window. That's how this started. Not with some grand moment, not with music playing in the background, not with the universe lining up some perfect collision between two people who were always meant to find each other. It started with a soup, and a window, and me standing at my sink at 7 a.m, still in the oversized t-shirt I'd slept in, holding a coffee mug with both hands because January in upstate New York does not care how many layers you have on. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't even fully awake. She was carrying a grocery bag across the small patch of front yard we technically shared, the one between my unit and hers, the invisible line in the snow that separated us without a fence, without a wall, just an understanding that we each had our half and we stayed on it. I had lived next to her for 4 months. 4 months. I knew exactly 3 things about her. Her name was Dara, she drove a slate gray Subaru, and she did not smile at people unless she had a specific reason to. I found that last part out early. First week. I waved. She looked at me the way you look at a term and condition screen, registered my existence, decided it didn't require action, and moved on. So I stopped waving. And I told myself that was fine, because I was not looking for a best friend. I was looking for a neighbor, and a neighbor who leaves you alone is, frankly, ideal. That's what I told myself. And then she knocked on my door with a container of homemade soup, because I had been coughing for 3 days, and apparently the walls between our units were thinner than either of us realized. She knocked. I opened the door in my worst state, red-nosed, unwashed hair, wrapped in a blanket like I was auditioning for the role of person who has given up. And she held out the container without fanfare, without a speech, without even that particular look of practiced compassion that people put on when they're doing a good thing and want credit for it. She just said, "Chicken and ginger. The ginger actually works." And then she left. That was it. That was the whole interaction. 30 seconds, maybe. No lingering. No invitation to chat. She handed me the soup, said the ginger works, and went back to her half of the yard. I stood in my doorway for a full 10 seconds after she was already gone. And then I closed the door. And I ate the soup. And the ginger actually did work. And I told myself that it was a neighborly gesture. Normal, human decency. People bring sick neighbors soup sometimes. It wasn't a big deal. I told myself that a lot over the next several weeks. It was a big deal. I just didn't know it yet. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Let me tell you who I was before any of this. My name is Sloan, 31 years old. I moved to this small town, Millbrook, about 2 hours north of the city, because my company went fully remote, and I couldn't justify the rent anymore. So I found a duplex, packed my car, and drove north in September thinking, new place, fresh start, finally some quiet. What I got was quiet. More quiet than I had asked for, honestly. I had a job I liked. Technical writing for a software company, which means I spend my days translating things that engineers think are simple into words that the rest of the world can actually follow. I was good at it. I kept to myself. I did my work. I made decent coffee. I went for walks when the weather allowed. My life was organized. Not in the sense that I had everything figured out. God, no. But organized in the sense that I had arranged it into manageable compartments that didn't overlap or surprise me. I had come out of a long relationship about a year before the move. Nina. 4 years. A relationship that, when I'm honest about it now, was more about comfort and habit than it was about anything that burned. We were compatible in the way that furniture is compatible with a room. Nothing clashed, everything fit. But nothing exactly took your breath away either. When it ended, we were both sad in a tired way. The way you're sad when something that was already over finally becomes official. I didn't leave Nina for someone else. I left because I kept waiting to feel something more, and I was tired of waiting. After Nina, I dated a little. Nothing serious. And then I stopped. And then I moved to Millbrook, which has a population of approximately 3,000 people, and one bar that closes at 10 on weekends. And I made peace with the idea of being alone for a while. So that's who I was. Organized. Quiet. Slightly numb in the way that people who have put themselves back together sometimes are. Functional, competent, mostly fine. And my neighbor Dara was a mystery I had already decided not to solve. I found out later, much later, what she was doing in Millbrook. She was a landscape architect, and she'd taken on a year-long project with a property management group that was restoring a historic estate about 20 minutes outside of town. She was there for the project. Like me, she'd just come from somewhere else. Like me. And she was not, it turned out, cold. But I didn't know that then. Then I just knew the soup. And the ginger actually works. I thought about her more than I should have after that. I noticed her car in the driveway and registered something when it was missing, and I didn't know why. I heard her moving around on her side of the wall, not intrusively, just the particular rhythms of another person's life bleeding softly through insulation. The coffee maker early in the morning. The television at a volume so low it was more impression than sound. The front door closing at 7:30 sharp every weekday. I started knowing her schedule without having any right to. I told myself it was just ambient awareness, the way you learn the sounds of any shared building. The sounds of the couple above you, the dog below, the teenager across the hall with the drums. Just context. Just the architecture of cohabitation. I was so convinced of that. I went 2 weeks without seeing her face to face after the soup. I was better. Spring was technically around the corner, even if January had no intention of acknowledging that, and I told myself I should say thank you properly. Not text, not a note under the door, but actually look her in the eye and say thank you for the soup. That was kind. I'm sorry I was such a disaster when you saw me. I rehearsed it, briefly, just in my head, which should have told me something right there, because I do not rehearse conversations with people I'm not nervous about. I'm 31 years old. I can thank a neighbor for soup without preparing remarks. But I rehearsed it. And then I went to knock on her door. She answered in work clothes, the kind designed for being outdoors in the cold. Thick vest, muddy boots she was in the process of pulling off when she opened the door. Hair pulled back in a way that suggested it had started the day more intentional and ended here, practical and loose. "Hey," she said. She looked at me like she was doing a rapid calculation. Not unfriendly, just careful. "Hey," I said. "I just wanted to say thank you for the soup." I recovered. I'm fully human again, more or less. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. More like a smile that checked itself at the door. "Good," she said. "Told you." "You did tell me." A pause. The particular kind of pause that could go either direction, toward a conversation or toward a polite close. She tilted her head slightly. "You want to come in?" I did not expect that. "Oh," I said like an idiot. "Sure. If you're not—" "I just made coffee," she said, and turned back into her apartment, which I took as an invitation. I stepped over her boots and followed her in. Her apartment was the mirror image of mine. Same layout, different world. Mine was mostly still boxes becoming furniture. The half-settled chaos of someone who moved in 3 months ago and is still locating her own things. Hers was spare. Clean in the way that isn't just cleanliness but a particular philosophy. Nothing on the counter that didn't need to be there. No decorative clutter. One potted plant on the windowsill that was thriving rather than merely surviving. Like everything in her space was there because it was wanted. I sat down at her kitchen table, and she set a mug in front of me without asking how I took it. It was black. I drink it black. I don't know how she knew that. "So you're the technical writer," she said, sitting across from me. "You know what I do?" "Mrs. Petrowski," she said, matter-of-factly. This was our building manager, 70 years old, knew everything about everyone, volunteered it freely. Right, I said. The whole building probably knows. She mentioned you were remote, said you were the quiet one. Is that good or bad? She considered the question seriously, which was already different from how most people would have handled it. Neither, she said, just accurate. And we talked. For almost 2 hours we talked. About her project, about landscape architecture, about what it means to restore something to what it was, rather than what people now think it should be. About my job, the strangeness of trying to make language do precision work. The way a single unclear word in a manual could cause a cascade of confusion. About Millbrook, which she liked more than she expected to. About January, which neither of us liked, but which we agreed had a certain brutal honesty about it. She laughed exactly once during that 2 hours. It was a real laugh. Short, surprised, like it escaped before she decided whether to let it out. I had said something about the specificity of upstate New York winters. Not just cold, but cold with attitude. And she laughed, and I felt something catch in my chest that I immediately, firmly, categorized as gratitude. Just gratitude. Relief. The relief of connection after months of quiet. That's all it was. That's what I told myself walking back to my side of the duplex. Here's the thing about a person who makes you feel interesting. You go back to them. I don't mean in some dramatic, intentional way. I mean in the small, almost invisible ways that don't feel like a pattern until you're already inside one. You find reasons. A borrowed measuring cup turned into a habit of returning it in person rather than leaving it on the mat. A question about the weekend weather became a 5-minute conversation through the cracked open door. A text about a noise I couldn't identify in the building turned into a thread that went on for 40 minutes about something entirely unrelated. It happened slowly, and then not slowly at all. By mid-February, we were having what I can only describe as an accidental friendship. Two people who, on paper, had agreed to nothing, and yet somehow found themselves at each other's kitchen tables several times a week. She never made formal plans. Neither did I. Things just happened, with a naturalness that I found easier not to examine. I started noticing things about her. Not dramatic things, small things. The way she held her mug with both hands even when the coffee was already cool. The specific crease between her eyebrows when she was thinking through a problem she hadn't solved yet. It wasn't frustration, more like concentration that had gotten physical. The fact that she had 3 different kinds of notebooks on her desk, and they each had a specific purpose that I had, without meaning to, learned. I noticed that she was different with me than she had been at the beginning. Still careful, still measured. Dara was not a person who gave herself away quickly or easily. But there was something that had loosened between us. She pushed back when she disagreed with me. She asked follow-up questions. She remembered things I'd said 2 weeks ago and circled back to them in ways that caught me off guard. One Thursday night in February, she knocked on my door at 9 p.m. with leftover pasta. Made too much, she said. It was a container, still warm. You're making it a thing, I said. Feeding me. You're a bad cook. I'm a fine cook. You eat cereal for dinner. How do you know that? She gave me a look that communicated, without great drama, that the walls in this duplex were thin enough to hear the distinct sound of a bowl against the counter versus the sound of actual cooking. Then she handed me the pasta. Come eat it over here, I said. I have wine. She looked at me for a second. Okay, she said. She came in. We ate the pasta and drank the wine, and talked until after midnight. About her family in Oregon, briefly and carefully, the way she talked about things that mattered, like someone carrying something fragile and not entirely sure it was safe to set down. About mine, in New Jersey, loud and well-meaning and relentlessly curious about my life, in a way I had always experienced as pressure until recently. I asked about her last relationship, Not because I was looking for information. Because I realized, somewhere in the fourth sentence, genuinely curious in a way that felt different from polite conversation. She was quiet for a moment. Set her wine glass down. "We were together for 3 years," she said. "We were good at being a team. Less good at being in love." She paused. I think she knew before I did that I'd never be fully there. Another pause. I'm not sure I knew what fully there looked like. I didn't say anything. I let that sentence sit. "What about you?" she said. I told her about Nina, about the comfort that wasn't quite enough, about the way a relationship can be correct and still be the wrong answer. She looked at me for a moment in a way that was very quiet and very particular, and I felt something at the back of my throat that I refused to name. "Yeah," she said. "That's it exactly." I don't know why those 4 words hit me the way they did. We were talking about failed relationships, about being unable to fully arrive somewhere. It wasn't a loaded conversation. It wasn't about anything between us. But I drove home. I went upstairs to my own apartment, a sentence that shows you how my head was starting to work. And I stood in the kitchen for a while, not doing anything in particular, just standing there with the specific feeling of something having shifted slightly on its axis. I thought about the way she said "that's it exactly," the directness of it, the recognition, like she'd been waiting for the right phrasing for something she'd known for years. I thought about that more than I should have. The week after that, I was on a work call when I saw her out my window working in the front yard. She'd cleared a section of the frozen ground, was doing something with soil samples and a clipboard, hair loose under a knit hat, totally absorbed. And I realized I had completely stopped listening to my call. I had to ask my colleague to repeat herself. I want to be very clear about something. I am a professional. I am organized. I am competent. I do not zone out of work calls because a neighbor is doing paperwork in the snow. I finished the call. I closed my laptop. I sat at the table and I had what I can only describe as a very direct conversation with myself. There was nothing happening here. Dara was my neighbor. She was not a warm person by default. She was specifically warm with me, which might have meant something, or might have just meant she was a person who took time to open up, and I had been patient enough. We were friends, maybe. The kind of friends who had found an orbit without meaning to. I wasn't developing. I was just lonely. I had moved to a small town alone, and this was the first real human connection I'd had in months, and it was natural that it felt significant. It was significant. Good friendships are significant. That's what this was. I believed that. I almost completely believed that. And then March happened. The snow had mostly cleared by early March, which in Millbrook means the mud season has arrived, and everything is either frozen or soaked, and the whole world looks like it's recovering from something. But the light was coming back. The days were getting longer in that specific way that feels almost personal after the dark of January, like the light is returning to you specifically. Dara knocked on my door on a Saturday morning and said her car wouldn't start, and could I drive her to the estate where she was working, because she needed to check on something before the contractors arrived on Monday. I said yes. Obviously, I said yes. We drove 20 minutes out on roads that curved through hills still striped with old snow, and she had her notebook open on her lap, and she was making sketches and notes as we drove, and at some point she read me a description of a garden she was planning to restore. A kitchen garden from the 1890s that had been paved over in the 1970s, and that she was going to bring back, plant by plant, as close to the original as documentation would allow. She read it with a quiet intensity that was entirely unperformed, and I kept my eyes on the road and I thought, this is the most interesting person I have ever sat next to in a car. We got there. She did her thing. I waited in the car for about 20 minutes while she walked the property with her clipboard, and then she came back, and her cheeks were pink from the cold, and she had a smudge of what I think was actual earth on her jacket from where she'd crouched down to look at something in the soil, and she climbed in and said, "Okay, that's what I needed," with the specific satisfaction of someone who has confirmed a theory. On the way back, she fell quiet. The good kind of quiet, not uncomfortable. I had learned the difference with Dara. Silence with her was never absence. It was just her being somewhere inside herself. Then she said, looking out the window, "Can I ask you something?" "Yeah," I said. "Do you actually like being alone? Like, you chose this. The town, the remote work, the quiet. Was that on purpose?" I thought about it. "Sort of," I said. "I think I needed to figure out who I was when I wasn't in relation to someone else. I kept organizing my life around other people. What made them comfortable? What fit their plans? I wanted to find out what I would choose if it was just about me." She turned to look at me. Not for long, but I felt it on my profile like warmth. "And," she said, "what did you choose?" "You're looking at it," I said. "Apparently I chose a duplex in a town with one bar and a neighbor who doesn't smile at strangers." She was quiet for a second. "I smiled," she said. "Eventually," I said. And there it was again. That specific thing that happened in the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, the one that checked itself, except this time it didn't quite check itself all the way. It made it further. I looked back at the road. My heart was doing something I didn't want to acknowledge it was doing. I drove the rest of the way home telling myself, firmly, that I was just happy. That's all. Happy to have a friend. Happy to have a person. I was getting worse at believing it. I want to tell you about the evening everything became impossible to ignore. But first I want to tell you about the 3 weeks before it. Because those 3 weeks were their own kind of thing. A slow accumulation of moments that, individually, I could explain away. But together were building something I could feel coming before I was ready to name it. The first thing was small. It was a Saturday in late March, and we were in her apartment. This had become a thing. Saturday evenings. Wine. Dinner assembled from whatever was in both our refrigerators. And she was telling me about a conflict with one of the contractors on the estate project. A man she called Dale with a capital D, who kept modifying her plans without consulting her, and then acting confused about why that was a problem. I had been listening, and I was genuinely angry on her behalf. But there was a moment. She paused, mid-story, to refill my glass, and I was watching her hands. And she looked up, and caught me watching, and neither of us looked away for a second that lasted longer than a second should. She finished filling my glass. I looked at my wine. Nothing was said. The second thing was a text. Tuesday night, after midnight, she sent me a photo with no context, just an image. A section of old garden she'd uncovered, brick pathways and the ghost shapes of raised beds, all re-emerging from the earth after decades of asphalt, like something refusing to stay buried. I stared at that photo for a long time. I typed, "That's incredible." Then I deleted it. Then I typed it again and sent it because what else do you say? She replied, "Right?" And then, "Made me think of you." I read that 3 times. Then I put my phone face down on the nightstand, and I lay there in the dark for a long time, not sleeping, staring at the ceiling, having a conversation with myself that I kept shutting down before it could fully form. Why did it make her think of me? Something refusing to stay buried. A thing that keeps coming back. A garden underneath the pavement. I didn't sleep well. The third thing was the afternoon she drove me to the ER. Nothing dramatic. I had cut my hand badly enough that I needed stitches. A kitchen accident that sounds embarrassing in retrospect because it involved a jar of peanut butter and a serrated knife and a moment of complete inattention. I knocked on her door because my hand was bleeding through a dish towel, and I needed someone to tell me if it needed stitches, and also I was lightheaded in a way I didn't fully trust. She took one look, said, "Get your coat," and drove me to urgent care without ceremony. She stayed. I told her she didn't have to, that it was going to be a wait, that she should go home and I'd call a rideshare back. She looked at me with that expression that I had learned by then meant she had already decided something and was simply waiting for me to catch up with the decision. So she stayed. We sat in the waiting room for 2 hours. She had her notebook. I had my phone. At some point, I put my head back against the wall and closed my eyes because I was tired and the adrenaline was draining out and the waiting room was warm. At some point, she said very quietly, "You okay?" "Yeah," I said, without opening my eyes. "Just tired." And then she said nothing, but I felt her shift in the chair beside me, and her shoulder was against mine, and she didn't move it away, and I didn't move mine away, and we sat like that until my name was called. She drove me home afterward. She came in and made sure I had what I needed: pain medication, a way to keep the stitches dry, food that didn't require 2 functional hands to prepare. She made me toast. She left it on the counter with a glass of water, and she said, "Get some sleep." And she left. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at the toast, and I thought about how her shoulder had felt against mine in that waiting room, and I had the most specific, clear, terrifying thought I'd had in a very long time. I thought, I am in so much trouble. Not trouble in the abstract. Not trouble in the gentle, manageable sense of a complicated feeling I could work through. I mean the kind of trouble that sits in the center of your chest and refuses to be organized away. The kind of trouble that, once you've named it, cannot be unnamed. I was falling for her. I had been falling for her for months, probably since the soup, possibly since the second conversation, definitely since the drive to the estate in March. I had been constructing a very elaborate and entirely unconvincing case for why none of it meant what it meant, and I had been failing at that case for weeks, and sitting alone in my kitchen with my bandaged hand and her toast, I just stopped making the case. I stopped, and the feeling was enormous. It wasn't comfortable. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't that warm, wonderful flood that people describe, the one that makes you feel like the world has cracked open in the most beautiful way. It was bigger and more frightening than that, because I could see, from where I stood, exactly what was at stake. This wasn't Nina. This wasn't a relationship of habit and comfort that I could leave cleanly if it didn't work out. This was the person who heard me cough through the wall and brought me soup. This was the person whose shoulder I had rested against in a waiting room at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. This was the person whose schedule I knew, whose notebooks I knew, whose specific silences I had learned to read. If I said something and it went wrong, I didn't just lose a romance. I lost the only real connection I had built since the move. I lost the person who made this town feel less like an accident. So I made a decision. I made the decision that I know, now, was exactly the wrong one. I decided not to say anything. I decided to take everything I was feeling and fold it very carefully and put it somewhere inside myself, where it wouldn't cause any damage, and keep being her neighbor, keep being her friend, if that's what we were, and protect the thing we had by keeping it exactly what it appeared to be. It was a very reasonable plan. It made complete sense on paper. It lasted about 5 days before it started to fall apart. What happened was simple. We had plans. Another Saturday evening, her place. She was going to show me the final restoration plans for the kitchen garden, the drawings she'd been working on for months. I had been looking forward to it all week with a feeling I was now trying very hard to call by a different name. I got there, and she had the plans spread across her kitchen table, huge drawings, hand-rendered in that specific way she worked, full of detail and care, the garden as it had been, and the garden as it would be, and the ghost map of everything in between. She walked me through it with her finger tracing the lines of the original paths, explaining what would survive and what needed to be rebuilt from documentation, what plants were native to this region in the 1890s, and what she was sourcing now to match. She was animated in a way I didn't see often, not loud, not performative, but alive. in the specific way that people are alive when they're talking about the thing they love most. I was watching her more than I was watching the drawings. At some point, she looked up and caught me not looking at the plans. "You're not following this," she said. Not accusing, just observant. "I am," I said. "You're not." She studied me for a moment. "What are you thinking about?" "You," I thought. "I'm thinking about you and the way you talk about this like it's something you're rescuing. And about the soup in January. And about the fact that I don't know what to do with any of this." "Just thinking about the garden," I said. "About what it takes to bring something back when it's been buried for that long." She looked at me for a second. Then she looked back at the drawings. "You have to know what was there first," she said, "before you can restore it. You have to understand the original, not the version that got paved over, not the version people think they remember, the actual original, what it was at its most itself." I stood very still. "Yeah," I said. My voice came out quieter than I meant it to. She was still looking at the drawings. Her finger moved along a line of what would become the old stone path. "The hardest part," she said, "is the people who want you to just build something new, something easier, something more practical. Why go through all this for something nobody remembers?" She paused. "But it's not the point. The point is that it was there. It existed. It mattered to someone. And that doesn't stop being true just because it got covered up." The room was very quiet. I looked at the side of her face, the curve of her jaw, the specific stillness of her when she was settled somewhere real. And I thought, she is not talking about the garden. Or maybe she was. Maybe she absolutely was only talking about the garden. Maybe I was so deep inside this that I was finding meaning everywhere she pointed. I didn't ask. I should have asked. I didn't. I went home that night and I did not sleep. And in the morning I decided that the plan was still the plan. I would not say anything. I would not complicate the only good thing in my life here. I would be her neighbor, her friend, whatever this was, and I would manage the rest by myself. Then she started pulling back. I don't know if she knew something had shifted in me, or if something shifted in her, or if it was just timing, just the coincidence of two people retreating from the same thing at the same time from different directions. But April arrived, and suddenly she was less present, less coffee, less conversation that went past 9 p.m. She texted, but with more brevity than before. Less of those specific exchanges that had started to feel like a language only the two of us spoke. I told myself she was busy. The project was entering a critical phase. Dale with a capital D was still a problem. She had a trip back to Oregon to visit family. All of that was true. But I also noticed, with a clarity I hadn't asked for, that I was spending a lot of time listening for her through the wall. The coffee maker in the morning, the television, the door. I was trying to figure out if she was home. And when she was, I was aware of the specific thickness of the wall between us in a way that felt almost physical. A kind of ache. That's the word, I think. Ache. Not heartbreak, not longing, just an ache. The sustained low-grade variety that hums under everything and refuses to be addressed because you've decided not to address it. I called my friend Marceline one evening in late April. She was still in the city. She knew me better than almost anyone. "You sound weird," she said, approximately 4 minutes in. "I'm fine. You sound like the last time you were about to make a decision that you'd already made and you just hadn't told me yet." "That's very specific." "It's a specific voice," she said. "What's going on?" "Nothing," I said. I think I have feelings for my neighbor." A pause. "The cold one? With the soup?" "She's not cold." A longer pause. "Sloane." "I know." "Does she know?" "No." "Do you want her to know?" And that was the question, wasn't it? The one I had been orbiting for 3 months. Not do I have feelings. I had stopped lying to myself about that. Not is it real? It was real. The question was just the one Marceline was asking, stripped down to its simplest form. Do I want her to know? I don't know, I said. Yes, you do, Marceline said. And she was right. But before we get to what happened next, if you've made it this far, then you know exactly what this feeling is. That ache. The specific weight of something real that you've decided not to say out loud yet. Click the like button right now. It's the smallest thing, and it means everything for this channel. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and hit the bell. So the next story finds you. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever decided to protect something by staying silent and ended up losing it anyway? Or have you ever spoken up and been terrified you'd ruined everything? I want to know. Write it down. I read every single one. And tell me what city you're watching from. I'll leave you a heart. Now. Back to Dara. The thing that finally broke the plan open wasn't a big moment. It almost never is. It was a Sunday in early May. The light had finally decided to stay for a while, the kind of afternoon that happens in upstate New York after the long season of gray, where the whole world seems to come back to itself slowly, surprised to still be there. Warm enough to have the windows open, warm enough to feel like something had shifted in the year. I was on my couch with a book I wasn't reading when I heard her on her side, not the wall sounds of her daily routine, but something else. A voice, hers, lower than usual, clipped in the way people get when they're arguing. Her end of a phone call. I wasn't trying to listen. The window was open. The walls were thin. I heard maybe 6 sentences total. I heard something like, I know what I said, and I heard you just don't, and I heard something that ended in a silence that felt like a door closing. Then quiet. Then, about 15 minutes later, a knock on my door. She was standing there in her outside clothes, jacket, boots, and she looked the way people look when they've made a decision right at the edge of their own endurance. That particular tightness around the jaw that I had come to recognize as her version of barely. Do you want to walk? She said. Yeah, I said. Give me a second. We walked the trail that ran along the creek bed at the edge of town, the one that was either muddy or flooded for most of winter and spring, but had finally dried out enough to be passable. We walked for a while without talking. This was fine. This was its own kind of fine with her. But I was aware of the weight of whatever she'd just come from, and I wasn't going to push. Eventually she said, My mom called. Okay, I said. She met someone. She wants me to come home for a visit, meet him. She paused. I think she's going to get married again. How do you feel about that? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know. I think I'm relieved. And I also think I've been using her as an excuse. The idea that she needed me to be close, to be available, to not have things be complicated. A pause. And the truth is, she's been fine for years, and I've been using her as a reason not to. She stopped. I waited. She stopped walking. I stopped a step or two ahead of her and turned around. She was standing in the middle of the path looking at the creek, and there was something in her expression that I hadn't seen before. Not the controlled carefulness I knew, but something underneath it. Something she had run out of ground to stand on. I think I've been doing that thing, she said, where you protect yourself from something by deciding you're not available for it. Like if you stay busy enough, invested enough somewhere else, the thing can't come close enough to hurt you. I didn't say anything. I was very still. And I think the thing came close anyway, she said. She turned and looked at me then. Direct. The way she did when she had already done her thinking and was done with the preamble. My heart was not behaving. "Sloane?" she said. "Yeah," I said. "I think you know what I'm trying to say." I looked at her. The creek was going. The trees were that specific green of early May, the new green, the one that doesn't last. The light was falling at an angle that made everything look like something you'd remember. "I think I know," I said. "But I want you to say it." She let out a small breath that was almost a laugh. "That's fair," she said. She took a step toward me, and then another, until she was close, and she looked at me the way you look at something you've been deciding about for a long time and have finally decided about. "I don't make things easy," she said. "I know that." "I know," I said. "I pull back when I'm scared. I've been pulling back since March, and I think you noticed." I noticed. "I was scared of this," she said. "Of liking someone this much. Of it being—" She paused. "Actual. Of it being something that could actually matter." I looked at her face, at the specific crease between her eyebrows that was there now, the concentrating one, the thinking through a problem one, except the problem this time was something she was deciding to let out rather than solve. "It matters," I said. My voice was very quiet. "To me. It matters." She looked at me for a long, suspended moment. Then she nodded. Not enthusiastically. Dara doesn't do things enthusiastically. That's not who she is. But with the specific gravity of something she meant completely. "Okay," she said. "Okay," I said. And we stood there on the trail beside the creek, and the afternoon light stayed warm. And I thought, I have been building toward this moment since January, since a container of soup and 30 seconds at a door. And I did not know that's what I was doing, and somehow that makes it feel more real than anything I have deliberately decided in a long time. We started walking again. At some point her hand brushed mine, just for a second. Accidental or not, I couldn't say with certainty. I didn't pull my hand away. She didn't either. We walked back to the duplex in the slanted May evening light, and nothing was said about what had just happened. But something was different. The difference wasn't loud. It was small and specific and entirely permanent. I know the word for that kind of different now. I knew it then, too. I just let myself know it. I should tell you that it didn't end simply. Life is not generally interested in clean endings, and ours was no different. 2 weeks after that afternoon on the trail, Dara got the call she'd been expecting and dreading in equal measure. The estate project was running ahead of schedule. The June timeline had moved up. If everything went according to plan, she'd be done by late June. And there was a new project waiting for her in Portland, the kind of project she'd been waiting years for. A full historic restoration of a Victorian-era botanical garden. The largest thing she'd ever been offered. She told me on a Tuesday evening. We were at my kitchen table, which had become as much hers as mine at this point. She said it quietly, watching my face. I kept my face quiet too, because that's what she needed me to do. Not make this harder than it already was. "That's incredible," I said. Because it was. Because the botanical garden project was the kind of thing she'd described to me in the way she described the kitchen garden on the estate. That particular aliveness, that purpose. "I know," she said. And then, "I'm sorry." "Don't," I said. "Don't apologize for a career you've worked for." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not apologizing for the career," she said. "I'm apologizing for the timing. For—" She stopped. Then, "For meeting you now." I looked at her across the table. "For meeting me now," I repeated. "It would have been easier," she said, "if it had been later. When I was somewhere I was staying." "Or earlier," I said. "So there was more time." A pause. Then something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, but that thing that lives near a smile in her. Yeah, she said. Or earlier. The weeks between that conversation and her leaving were the kind of time that feels both very fast and very slow. The particular compression that happens when you're living inside a countdown you didn't choose. We were careful with each other, and also less careful than we'd ever been. We talked more. We were quieter in different ways, fewer of the productive silences, more of the kind where something unsaid was taking up all the room. We went back to the estate once, the Saturday before her last week. She walked me through the kitchen garden. The brick paths were back, some of the beds were planted, the stone borders cleaned and reset into their original positions. It looked like something being remembered correctly. She stood at the edge of it and looked at it the way people look at things they've made, with a specific mix of satisfaction and already grief. "Did it come out like you wanted?" I asked. "Better," she said. "It always comes out better than the plans, once it has the actual earth." I stood beside her, and I understood that we were talking about more than one thing, and neither of us was going to say which thing. And that was all right. Her last day was a Saturday. She had a rental truck. She had more boxes than I expected. The sparse apartment, it turned out, was just highly edited. There was more underneath. I helped her carry things. We didn't talk much. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was too much, and we'd both decided not to start something we couldn't finish on a Saturday morning with a moving truck idling in the driveway. When the truck was loaded, she stood by the driver's side door and looked at me. She was holding the apartment key, the one she'd returned to Mrs. Petrowski, the one that said, "Here is where I lived. Here is where this happened." She turned it once in her hand. Then she held it out to me instead. "I know you're not the landlord," she said. "I know," I said. I took it anyway. I don't know what to tell you about what that meant. I just know that I closed my hand around it, and she looked at me, and for a moment, long enough to memorize, there was nothing but that. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the moving help. I knew that. For not making me feel like I was always arriving too late." "You weren't," I said. "You were exactly on time." Her expression shifted in the way it does when something hits her where she keeps the real things. She looked at me for one more long moment, and I looked back, and then she got in the truck. She drove out of the driveway. I stood in the yard until the truck had turned at the end of the street and disappeared. The key was still in my hand, still warm. I stood there for a while. The May morning was doing its best. The tree at the edge of the yard was full of new leaves, the specific green that doesn't last, and the light came through it the way it had come through things for the past 4 months of being her neighbor, falling on ordinary moments and making them feel like they were worth remembering. I went inside. I put the key on my kitchen counter, next to the mug she'd left behind. She'd been using it so consistently it had become hers in everything but name. I made coffee. Stood at the window. The half of the yard that had been hers was just a yard now. No Subaru. No one. I picked up my phone. There was already a message from her, time-stamped 12 minutes ago. She must have sent it while I was still standing in the yard. "The ginger actually works," it said. I stood at the window for a long time, holding my phone and looking at those 4 words. Then I started to laugh, quietly, to myself. The kind of laugh that sits right next to something that could be the other thing if you're not careful. I wasn't careful. Both things happened at once. The laugh and the other thing. Right there in my kitchen. Alone. With her mug and her message, and a key that wasn't mine but was. And it was not the worst feeling. It was in fact one of the most honest feelings I'd had in years. Full and clear and real in the specific way that things are real when they have actually cost something. I wrote back, "I know, you told me." She sent back one word, Sloan. I looked at my name in her message, the way she'd written it. Just the name, alone. the whole weight of the last 4 months pressed into 2 syllables. I set the phone down. I stood in the kitchen with the coffee and the light and the quiet of the apartment that had been mine before she arrived, and was mine again now. And I let myself feel the full specific size of what this had been. A person who made me interesting to myself. A person who heard me cough through the wall and showed up anyway. A person who taught me, accidentally and entirely, that the thing I was waiting to feel was real. That the word actually mattered. That there or not quite there was a real distinction. That I'd been living the not quite version for long enough to recognize the actual thing the moment it arrived. She hadn't stayed. But she had been here. And that, whatever it cost, whatever it left behind, that was something. That was the kind of something that changes the shape of what you're willing to settle for. I was not going to settle for not quite anymore. Not after this. Some weeks after that Saturday, I rearranged my kitchen. Small thing. Moved the coffee maker to the window side of the counter. Just because it felt right to have the morning light hit it. I planted something in the front yard too. A small section of herbs. Rosemary, thyme, something that would come back next year. I don't know if I've become a gardener or just a person who needed to put something in the ground. Maybe both. I talked to Dara on the phone. Not every day, but often. She sends me photos of the botanical garden project, the plans, the demolition, the first sections of uncovered historic paths. I send her pictures of the herbs, which are doing better than I expected. The key is still on my counter. I keep it there because it reminds me of something specific. That some connections don't end when the person leaves. They just change shape. And the changed shape is still real. Still worth keeping. If this story reached something in you, write Saudade in the comments. So I know you were here. That you made it to the end with me. And if you want another story that lives in the same place, the real ones, the costly ones, the kind that change the shape of things, click what's on your screen right now. Big hug. Until the next one. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.